Hello there all my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Arrow Wirework ring. Now it's a very delicate design and it's also adjustable, and it'll be perfect for Valentine's of course, so if you want to learn how to make it, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now all we really need are two different gauges of regular round wire here, and I'm just using a copper one. Now the first gauge is a 0.6 mil, and this is going to be the base wire. It's quite a fine base wire, but that's why we then combine it with a 0.25 mil weaving wire here. They're going to work great together. So let's get our wire ready and let's get started. Then we need to cut some lengths of our wire, and what I have here first of all is a length of a 0.6 mil of about 25 centimeters, and this is going to be the base wire for the whole ring. And then I have a length of a 0.25 mil wire here of about 1.5 meter, and this is the weaving wire throughout the ring. Now the first thing we need to do is make the very point of the arrow, and I'm going to take the base wire first of all. Now we need to find the midpoint of this length that we cut off. So I have about even lengths going out to either side, and I've got my pliers in the middle there, and we just need to first of all put a bend into this. It's going to be the very point of the arrow. So I'm going to just push the wire against the pliers there, and we want about a 90-degree angle, and want to try and get it a little bit sharp. So just go on either side of the bend and kind of sharpen it up, squeezing on either side. And then if you need to adjust the angle a bit, I just need to tighten it up a little bit. So we have that about 90-degree angle, a little something like this. So then we have that bend in place. Then what I want to do is finish off the arrowhead by then working with one side at a time. So I'm judging this a little bit by eye. So I'm kind of moving down, just starting on one side, the wire a little bit, to the point where I want my next bend. So somewhere around there. And then I'm working on the right side first of all. Then want to bend the wire against the pliers. And this time we want more than just a 90-degree angle, you can see, because that would then follow the other wire. But what we actually need is for it to continue and overlap, so become a tighter angle and go straight out to the other side there. Again, try and get that bend nice and tight. Now on the other side, need to do the same thing. So I'm going to gauge about the same distance to go down. To put that bend in place. And then bend that wire towards the opposite side as well. It's then going to overlap the other wire. And you can see, I'm just making sure it's going to lay on top. That just kind of went underneath. And just push that tight against the pliers as well. And just straighten it out a little bit. I'm just going to sharpen up that bend a bit. And you can see that the wires are now laying on top of each other on the bottom part. But we have actually the shape of the arrowhead in place now. And then what we need is for, instead of these two wires to overlap each other like this, we need them to start coming down and away from the arrowhead to obviously form the rest of the arrow. So I've just swapped to a finer pair of pliers here, just because obviously it's only a little space that we're working with. And in this case here, the wire that's going out to the left side is the one that's on top. So I'm just starting with that. So I'm placing my pliers at the point where when I then bend this wire against the pliers, it's going to lay almost in the middle and come straight down. So I'm just going to make sure that I have my pliers where I want that bend to be. And then I'm going to bend this wire against the pliers. And again, get it pretty nice and sharp as much as you can. And then just pull this wire straight down and smooth it out as well if you need to, because obviously it does get shaped a bit with working with it. Then we have, just flip it over, the wire on the other side. That's still going out to the side, but we also want that to come straight down in the same way. So, same principle. Place the pliers where you want the bend to be. And then bend the wire against the pliers so it comes straight down. Now what you want to try and do is obviously have this as symmetrical as possible. So if you need to adjust anything, do that as you go. So these two wires end up, when they end up laying flat next to each other, so something like that, they end up in the middle. So basically opposite the point of the arrowhead. And then we just want to straighten these two out and have them laying flat next to each other all the way down. And make sure there's no kinks or bends here. So just straighten that out. And then we have the basic shape in place. So what I also just want to mention is the size of this arrowhead here obviously depends on what you personally want. But for reference, the size of mine here is that the lengths of either side of the very point are about 5 millimeters long on either side there. So it's just for reference. But then what we've got to do now is start actually filling this in and bring our weaving wire into it. So I grab hold of one end of that, and then I want to first of all get this attached to the arrowhead. And I'm going to start at the very point. So I'm just starting with a short little end here instead of working with the long end. I'm just going to work with the short end first while I'm attaching it. So I'm kind of just keeping a hold of it because obviously it's quite small, so it can be a little bit fiddly. And I want to then attach this by wrapping it around the base wire at the very tip of the arrowhead. So I'm literally bringing it back through and basically coiling it around the base wire. And just do this a few times, making sure the coils are laying next to each other. Now, I just want to make sure they're also nice and tight. So you can just use some pliers to squeeze them together if you need to. And then I also want to start making sure that the coil here is going to be sitting at the very point. And we need to make sure we don't do too many because we don't want it moving too far up the sides. We can just maybe do another one or two. Because then what we need to do is start making a weave that's going to actually fill in the open space. So this is just kind of coiling around the base wire at the tip to make it blend in. And obviously to begin with, also to fasten the weaving wire to the base wire. So I'm just going to use the rest of this tail here to help hold on to the piece, because especially here at the beginning it's going to be a little bit fiddly because there's not a lot to hold on to. But I then have the long length of my weaving wire here, because you can see I've then filled in the very tip and now can start filling in the actual open space. So right now this weaving wire is coming from the bottom side and it's going down through the middle. So that means I'm going to cross over to the other side. I'm going to go underneath the other side there. So I'm going to be using the figure of 8 weave and then pushing that down to sit right next to the first wraps that I did. Now instead of taking the very end of wire and kind of feeding it through, remember this is actually open, so I can literally just go between the legs there and then feed it all the way down, and that makes it a lot easier just to wrap instead of using that long end to carefully feed it through. And then I'm going around that same side again, making sure that those wraps are nice and tight and sitting next to the other wraps. I'm going to go through the legs again. So that's my first wrap from one side to the other. So I've then wrapped on that opposite side twice now. So I'm going to swap back to the first side. So that's the principle of the figure of 8 weave. You're swapping from side to side and doing an extra wrap along the way. So I've gone from the top side there with how I'm holding it. Then I'm going to move down to the bottom. And then wrap around this side, go between the legs. Wrap around once. And then go between the legs. And it's just wrapped around again. Making sure it's nice and tight. And then we swap straight over to the other side. And then you can slowly start to see we're getting kind of wires crossing over, which is how we fill in the open space. So you basically just continue like this until we get to the point where the wires are coming back in towards the middle, because obviously then there's no more open space left. So now you can see I've filled in the rest of the arrowhead here. We'll get that nice effect. And in this case here, I've just ended up on the top side, but it doesn't really matter, because what I'm then going to do is we need to bring it down so we can actually use this weaving wire to continue with these legs here. So I've finished up on the top, so I'm going to just bring it back around again like I would otherwise, as if I was going to do another wrap, and then just bring it between the legs, bring it down here into the arrowhead. Now I'm not going to then bring it down and do another wrap here because I haven't got any more space to do that. So what I'm going to do instead is just first of all hold on to the wraps on the top side just to make sure they don't slip over the corner. But then I want to bring this weaving wire and start actually coiling around the legs. So basically, I'm going to just bring it around from the bottom and then back over the top of both of them. And obviously we're making sure these two are laying flat next to each other, the two legs. And then I just wrapped around them once now. And we basically now want to keep doing that. So I just want to make sure this is pushed all the way as far up as it'll go. And then otherwise we just keep wrapping this weaving wire as we're just coiling around, almost as if it was one wire. We just got to pay attention to make sure they keep laying flat next to each other. And make sure also that the wraps here, the coils, aren't overlapping in any way. So they stay flat next to each other as well. And you're going to find we'll get a nice even coil all the way along. So just keep doing this until we have the length that we need. So now I've weaved my length here. As you can see, I've just kept wrapping that weaving wire around, and I've stopped at the point where I know it's going to fit the size ring that I want. So the way you gauge that, because obviously it all depends on the size that you want on your ring. So you would just, for instance, have a ring mandrel here. Then you could take a spare piece of scrap wire and kind of, on the size that you want, bring it around the ring mandrel, and then just make sure that the ends overlap a bit, because what I'm going to do is the very point of the arrow here, so the arrowhead, and then the tail that we're going to make after this, they're going to be overlapping. So it's going to be an adjustable ring, but they kind of overlap. So you want it just a bit longer than the actual size of ring that you want. So just keep that in mind, but just measure that depending on the size that you need. And also you might find as you're coiling this weaving wire around the base wires here, the two legs, that they might start to twist a little bit. So instead of just continuing to lay completely flat next to each other, they might kind of start to want to twist. So what you do to counteract that is just kind of take your piece and just twist it in the opposite direction where the twist is starting, and then it'll kind of flatten it out nicely. You can also go in with some flat nose pliers and kind of flatten it down after you wrapped the weaving wire around. But now we're at this point here, I still have some length of my weaving wire left, which we're still yet to use. We need to also fill in the tail once we made that shape. But then now we need to start making that tail to finish off the arrow completely. So to start making the tail, first of all, I'm going to take my chain nose pliers here, because we first of all need to get the shape in place, kind of like we did with the arrowhead, getting the shape in place first and then filling it in. So we got our two legs of the base wires. So I'm just going to gently kind of separate them a little bit so I can get my pliers in between here and place them. Now we don't want to go all the way up to where the weaving wire or the wraps there finished just yet, because we need to come down just a little bit. So imagine the tail is going to be sitting from the very end of where the weave more or less there is finished, or the wraps, and then down to where I'm placing my pliers is going to be the bottom end of it. So again, you kind of gauge this by eye. You can also measure if you know how long you want it. Then I'm going to take, first of all, the length that I got my pliers on, and then this is the left wire. I'm just going to bend that out towards the left. So just bend it against the pliers. And what we don't want a 90-degree angle like before, so we don't want to bend it completely flat there. We want it to kind of have an angle. So come out, not completely to the side, but obviously not come straight down either. So have a bit of an angle, a little something like that. We can always adjust that more. So I'm just going to go to the other side. So this is the right wire. Do the same. Kind of get that bend in place first of all to make sure that they're nice and even. Just need to move up just a little bit more. Just get my pliers in there. So obviously you can easily bend it, say to 90 degrees or more, and then kind of open it back up. That also helps getting the actual bends and corners that we're making sharper. Kind of tighten them up a bit. And then basically open them back up to the angle that you want. Now, I'm going to then push these two wires back together. So they're still, again, then laying flat next to each other and right next to each other. So something like that. So push them back together, and then you can kind of adjust the angles down here how you want them to be. So if you want to come further down, it's kind of up to you how you want it to look. But just make sure it's not 90 degrees, because kind of a little bit more realistic to the shape. Now what I personally find is a nice angle that they're at is basically having 90 degrees between the two wires, instead of thinking maybe so much about the angle from that wire to the side. I find that it's 90 degrees between them tends to be quite nice. But then we need to get the wires coming back up again. So again, just starting with doing one side at a time. And I'm going to go out from that bend that we just did. Again, judging by eye. And then just keep hold of the wire. And then I'm bending the wire back down, basically towards the arrowhead. And having that come straight, side by side with the coiled part. So come straight up like that. Now I'm going to do the other side and try and get that as even as possible. So place your pliers and then bend the end against your pliers. And then just make sure they're as even as possible before I complete. I think I kind of want to just come down just a little bit more. Just so, obviously, they become as even as possible with each other. So it's all as symmetrical as it can be. And then we can also just tighten them up. So sharpening up all the bends that we want to. and still just end up making sure that the wires come straight down, basically alongside each other. So something a bit like that. Then we just need to make the final bends here. So just do one side at a time. I'm going to place my pliers where I want the bend to be. So basically now what I want to do is emulate the original bend that we did down here with the angle where they were about 50 degrees from each other. And I want them to come back in towards the middle. So I want to basically the ends of the wires coming to where the end of the coils are, but I don't want them coming straight in. So I'm going down just a little bit. And then I'm going to take the wire and bend it against the pliers. Now first of all, we can just kind of overbend it a little bit, just to kind of sharpen that up. And then you can open it back up. And you can see we then get a similar angle as much as possible with the one on the bottom end. Do the same with the other side. So place the pliers in that place where you want the bend to be. And then just need to swap hands here. Overbending it just to help sharpen up that angle. And then just open it back up a bit. And you can now see the wires here basically cross over each other, which is fine because we're then also going to cut off the excess, get rid of the ends of the wire here. But this is basically the basic shape of the very end, so the tail end of the arrow. So to get rid of the excess wire here, I'm going to take my flush cutters and go in and cut it off. Now where I want to cut it is, so once I've cut the wire here, so say on the left side first, the end of the wire that's left, I want to end up butting up like that sideways against the side of the middle part, which is then also going to make sure we kind of get rid of the end. So just go in and cut off the excess. Now I'd rather cut off too little than too much, because you can always cut off a bit more, but obviously if you cut off too much you can't really attach any more wire to the end. So start out with something like that. I'm going to cut the other side as well. Cut that there. And then I'm just going to have a little look and see. I can probably just cut off a little bit more before I kind of flatten it out. So, like I said, rather cut off too little to begin with, because you can always go in and snip off just a little bit more if you need to. The same on the other side, I think, just a tiny bit more. Something like that. And then if I go and just take my chain nose pliers and kind of flatten it down so it's not sticking up on that side now like it is on the other side, you kind of see the difference. Then what's happened is that the very end of the wire is butting up against the side of the wire, or the weave rather, in the middle there. And just do the same with the other side, just bring it in close. So we're basically flattening it out, so the wire is not sticking out and away from anything. So this is the situation we're in now. We now have the actual shape of the tail in place. So all we've got to do now is use the rest of this wire here to fill it in. So how I've ended up here is with my weaving wire kind of coming out towards the bottom. And if I was going to keep wrapping, so just keep coiling, I would keep going over and then back behind and then go that direction. But instead of doing that, and I want to fill in the tail, so it's more or less the same principle as when we filled in the arrowhead. But obviously now we kind of have two spaces to fill in at the same time. So what I'm going to do is, in this case, I just need to go to the end because it's only a little space that we're working with. But I'm going to bring it towards the top. So I'm going to go through the top part just with how I'm holding it here. And then push that nice and tight because we still want them wraps in the middle to continue. Now what we need to do is, as I'm doing the wraps in the middle, we also need to go out to the sides so we can fill in the open spaces. So I want to bring this wire, is coming down through the top gap there. So I want to bring it to go underneath the outer side and then get right to the end, just finding the end of my weaving wire here. Come back down through the same gap and just pull it all the way through. So basically now I'm coiling around the outer edge, you could say, of the tail on that top side. So that's one, but we want to get through a couple of times. So I'm getting to the end of my weaving wire again. Now where I've also pulled this little wrap that we just did tight is basically right on the corner right there. So that little bend that we did, you want to make sure you kind of keep hold of the wire so it doesn't slip down, because it would naturally want to slip down this side and come back in towards the middle. So just kind of hold it in place there best you can. I'll come back through again. So we've done it once, this is the second time, and we're wrapping around that upper side again. So I now have two wraps right next to each other, and obviously it's quite small working with, so you can easily just tighten it up with your pliers. I then want to get the end and go back through again. So this is the third time. And again, this wrap just nice and tight to the others. But as I'm pushing that, just make sure you don't push it to come over the corner and down the side. So that's the first part on that side there. I've done it 3 times, and now I want to come back into the middle. So it's going down through the gap. So that means it's coming behind the 2 wires in the middle. And I'm then going to come up through the bottom gap. So bring it through like this. Just hold everything however you need to. And then to kind of pull it together and making sure that the weaving wire here doesn't move around too much, I'm then going to just do a wrap around those 2 legs in the middle. So basically those will continue and make it quite seamless from previously. So I'm now going basically over the 2 wires in the middle and down through the gap on the top, and then push that down nice and tight so we don't have any gaps between our wraps ideally. And then get the end and come back up through the bottom gap again. So there we go. You can see we kind of have that loose wrap right there in the middle. And we then want to move to the bottom side and basically repeat what we did on the top there. So right now it's coming up through the bottom gap. So that means I'm just bringing it down, and it's going to go around the bottom side down here. But I'm getting the very end of the wire and just feeding it through that bottom gap from below again. And then as I tighten this first wrap, you just again want to make sure, because this is kind of just in the beginning until we know they're sitting where we want them to, that this wrap sits right by that corner and it doesn't kind of slip further up. So just push them close together so they're sitting in place. And now we want to do a few wraps here. So that was once. We'll go through making sure we don't get any kinks. Twice. Just going to tighten them again so they stay close together. Get the end of the wire and then go through a third time. and tighten that to sit right next to the other wraps. Now instead of then coming around the bottom here to go through again, I'm going to bring the wire over the top of the two middle wires, because we then need to go back to the top side. So over the top of them, which means then going down through the top gap. So it goes over the top of those two wires in the middle, where we just want to do a wrap like before. Again, to continue that as well, alongside the ones on the side. So come up through the bottom gap to do a wrap there, down through the top gap, and then just push that down nice and tight. You can see as we're doing wraps on the top and the bottom side there, we're then also building it in the middle. So all alongside each other. And now that that's in place, bring it back towards the top so it comes underneath the very top wire. Push the middle ones, wraps nice and close together. Come down through the top gap. And now it's basically just continuing doing this. We now don't really need to worry so much about that corner. Obviously, if you push it hard, you can still push them further down. But we already kind of have things in place. So that was once, twice, and then through again. Again, having all the wraps here nice and tight together. Then come down behind the middle two wires that sit next to each other, up through the bottom gap. Oops. Bring that through the bottom gap. And then just remember to do that single wrap in the middle around the two wires there. And come up through the bottom one again. So we're then in position to do the next wraps on the bottom side. So it's coming down naturally to the bottom now. And it's over the top of the wire, so that means I'm grabbing the end of the weaving wire, coming behind and going up through the bottom gap there. Oops, getting caught in my pliers. One wrap. Two wraps. Just push down those middle ones. And keep doing that, so make sure there aren't any gaps that we don't want anywhere. And the third one, and just check everything. If you're happy with it, you basically just continue like this. So now I take the weaving wire over the top of the two wires in the middle, wrap around that ones, you swap to the top, so you keep alternating from top to bottom, and remembering to wrap around the middle ones along the way, and obviously until we don't have any more space to fill in. So now you can see that I basically run out of space here to keep filling in this tail end. So what I'm going to do is I've just ended up on the top side. It doesn't matter what side you end up on, but here what you'll find is I've ended up right in the corner, and I've done those few rounds or the wraps that I would normally do. But instead of then swapping into the middle and do a wrap there, what I'm going to do is just continue to coil around the same wire. So just bring that through, and then it's going to start moving down on these ends instead. So basically the bare base wire that we haven't coiled around yet. So it's also just going to make it blend in nicely. So I'm just going to keep coiling around there. Make sure the wraps are nice and tight, close to each other. Now I'm going to move in towards the middle. So moving my way down towards the middle there, and then once I reach there and I kind of filled in that whole space, I'm just going to swap over and then fill in the other side as well. So I kept weaving all the way across on the other side as well, and I've now ended up down here, and I'm out of space to keep wrapping. So what I'm going to do now is literally just finish off the wire. So I'm going to kind of bring it around as if I was going to do another wrap, but I'm not going to bring it through. Then I'm going to cut off the excess, and it's just going to be a little tail left. And then I take my chain nose and squeeze that down, and then I like to roll it in the direction that I was wrapping the wire in, because that will then tuck it away and kind of push it inside of the piece and get that tail out of the way. And then just put your finger over it, make sure you can't feel it, because obviously you don't want to be able to feel the wire on your skin or anything. So that's basically this end finished off. Now go back to the beginning if you haven't got rid of this already, and all you got to do is finish this off as well. Same principle. Continue the wrap, except don't go through. And I'm just going to cut off the excess. We just have a short little tail left that needs to be flattened down and then pushed in and kind of rolled to go inside. Oops, lost grip there. Actually, I think just cut off a little bit more from the tail, just to make sure there's no risk of it kind of sticking out. And then flatten it down and roll it in so it gets kind of tangled up and tucked away inside, in between all those other wires. And that end is now finished off as well. So we have the actual basic arrow ready. Now what we got to do is shape this, and for that I'm going to take my ring mandrel and then just place the arrow on there, and then I'm going to start bringing the sides kind of around. Now obviously you want to kind of get it to the size that you want it to. So, and this is what I then also meant with when you were gauging the size that you need, is for the ends to basically overlap. Now what you're going to find is if you just shape it around the size that you want, it's going to kind of spring open a bit, so not really end up on the size. So you kind of have to go down in size and tighten it up a bit more, and then it'll spring open to get to the size that you want. So obviously you can keep doing that until it has a size that you need. But then this is how the ring finally looks, and you can see it's slightly adjustable, but you have the ends there, the tail and the arrowhead, just overlapping each other. So that is the new ring finished and ready to wear. Now I have previously made a bracelet version of this design, so you can obviously make this to match and they'll go perfectly together in a set. So I'm going to make sure to leave a link for that in the description box down below. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.